Welcome to Spiritual Cinema. This is episode 1, brought to you by Jasmine Fields Speaks. Remember that Spiritual Cinema is where we come together and talk about all things spiritual. We talk about movies, music, literature that have biblical principles included, and we do in-depth Bible study. So today we're going to be talking about Genesis 4:25 through 26, a new son. This will be a brief episode as we only have 2 verses in this particular title. So let's get started. When we do our initial reading, we use just the standard New King James Version. We're looking for promises, commands, bewares, descriptions of Christ, general information, and then me personally, I like to highlight things that I want to be used to describe me. So when we were doing our first read, we found a few things. We saw our first people. So we have Adam, the first man, Eve, Adam's wife, mom of Cain, mom of the late Abel, and mom of the new son, Seth, which is where we get our caption. Seth is the third son mentioned of Adam and Eve, and he is the father of Enos in the King James Version, or Enosh in New King James and New Living Translation. We also obviously have Enos or Enosh, and he is the son of Seth. So when I first did my initial read, I did have a question immediately, even though we only have 2 verses in this particular title. My first question was, had Adam and Eve stopped calling on God? That was mentioned in 4:26 when they said that men started to call on God again. So at this point, we know that Adam and Eve have been booted out of the Garden of Eden, and they are essentially having to suffer when it comes to labor, and they're having to work the ground in order to produce their food. Some insights that I got, even from just the plain text, is that Adam recognized Seth as a blessing, saying that he is another son instead of Abel. Now, this is where translations and studying from multiple translations is important, because when we do our initial read, I use a New King James Version, and there was a little bit of text left out of that particular version of the Bible, and therefore it sounded like to me that Adam is the one that recognized Seth as a blessing or a replacement for the fact that Abel had been killed. So let's go ahead and move on to our inductive study. We use a journaling Bible and occasionally maps when we have the inductive study. And we're looking for things like the author, list, recipients of things, members of the Trinity, the entire Trinity, numbers, time references, locations. We're looking for things that we're comparing and contrasting, and we're looking for conclusions, particular suffering, action, or enhancements of words, because words are very important, which we're actually going to get to here momentarily. So the very first thing that I see is a particular word. Now, we use this word every day in the English language. However, in this biblical principle, I felt like it was used a little bit differently. So in verse 25, we see the word seed. So I actually looked up the word seed for its just general definition, not a biblical definition. And it says a plant's unit of reproduction capable of producing another. So it's capable of producing another plant. And when we use seed in this particular context, we're talking about that the seed is Seth, and he is calling on the name of the Lord. And so if seed and Seth are synonymous, and Seth is calling on the name of the Lord, and he's capable of producing another, he's producing another seed or another son that is calling on the name of the Lord. Something else that I saw in just the insights here is the number of ands or conjunctions is really surprising to me in just these two short verses. And a couple of personal thoughts that I had is that at first I thought it was Adam, which we'll get to in a moment, but Adam referred to Seth as a seed. Now, seed is the beginning of a harvest, and you're going to see all these things come together momentarily, so stick with me. But seed is the beginning of a harvest. It's planted and nurtured to make something grow. That is so profound. I mean, that may have been something that I should have highlighted in orange, because quite frankly, I want people to say that I am a seed calling on the name of the Lord. And therefore, all the work that I'm putting in with my kids, with saying our prayers, and trying to get a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old to sit down and watch a sermon, because we're in virtual church right now. I have them sit down to listen to a sermon, and we pray over our meals. That means that if I am a seed capable of reproducing another, and that it will come to a harvest, because we know that I am planted in good ground, and I know that the Lord is going to nurture me. That means that my children will also do the same. Hallelujah. I'm claiming that for myself. So then let's move to step 3 in our Bible study, where we're looking for an understanding. And I use a cultural heritage Bible for this particular area. It is New King James Version as well. And so I just read the commentary portion of that particular Bible. And here I found what I feel like is an answer to question number 1. Remember, I had said that had Adam and Eve stopped calling on the Lord, and in the Heritage Bible, it seems to believe that this represents calling for the Lord's presence that had been eliminated due to the fall. So remember, when they lived in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, God was walking through the garden with them. They were present. But because of the fall, Eve ate the apple and gave the apple to Adam, and he willingly partook. And so they had both sinned, and sin separates us from God. And so the presence of the Lord among Adam and Eve was now distant. It was strained because of their sin. And so the Heritage Bible is saying that they believe that this represents them calling on the Lord for his presence again after the fall. And they also say that this is the beginning of religion. And several other commentaries that I read also said this was at least the beginning of worship. And we know that worship draws us closer to God. So that's what we got out of the cultural, looking for some understanding. Now me, I'm married, and so I also like to look for information about being a woman and marriage. I know that I have a calling to write a book called Always Covered, which is about marriage, war, and deployment. Since your husband is supposed to be the head and your husband is now away, how are you supposed to deal with and manage that situation as a woman? And so I did read through the Women's Bible and the commentary, and there I saw that it talks about Christ being a descendant of Seth. Because, family is very important. And there is no family without woman. So, Christ is a descendant of Seth, which really means that seed, going back to seed is an appropriate name here because it is literally the start of a godly line. So, and we may get to this in a moment, so spoiler alert, I'm sorry. But Noah, who was the only man and his children and their wives that were saved during the flood, is a descendant of Seth. And we know that Jesus Christ is also a descendant of Noah, which is how you have the connection between Seth, Noah, and Christ. What we also see is that apparently in the original translations, Yahweh was actually used in the place of God when they talk about God appointing another son instead of Abel. Now, I will say that I ended up with another question, and that was, did Adam or Eve name Seth? Now, this was interesting to me because, as you know, Adam named all the animals. Adam is the man, which means that he's the head, which seems to me probably led to my assumption that it was actually Adam who was speaking at that time, calling Seth a seed instead of Abel and naming Seth. But as you will see momentarily from our continued study, it does not appear that it is Adam who actually named and called Seth appointed. The New Living Translation, which is what the Women's Bible is that I use, says that Eve named Seth and called him a seed. So, of course, I had to do some research in some other translations. Generally, when I have to do research in other translations, I use a King James version of the Bible, which luckily for me was a part of the 5th reading of this particular section of the Bible. So I use my Jesus-centered and my Rainbow Bible to look at these verses and the commentary and learn that the King James Version agrees with the New Living Translation, which says that Eve is the one that named Seth. She is the one that called him appointed, which that says a lot to me, since the only communication directly from God to Eve at that point had been correction. But yet she still was able to see that Christ was blessing her, or the Lord was blessing her, for clarity's sake. The Lord was blessing her with another son to love. That's amazing. It really speaks to how so many people talk about, once the Lord and the word has gotten into your heart, it will manifest, it will harvest. And so, despite the fact that there was no information in the Bible about God speaking directly to Eve, giving her the instruction about sin or the trees, and we don't actually see any evidence of God speaking directly to Eve until she was corrected after the fall. Her connection to the Lord was still so powerful that she still recognized the blessings that she received, even when she was no longer in the garden. She had probably just gone through immense pain in the delivery of Seth, and yet she still called him a blessing. Something given to her by God. That's amazing. That's amazing. So, the Women's Bible also pointed out to me that a couple of meanings of the name Seth were appointed or granted. Remember, because they're calling him a gift as a replacement for their deceased son, Abel. I'm sorry. Adam is not deceased at this point. Abel. Okay, so then just our sixth reading came from the Financial Breakthrough Bible. And here the question that they want us to use to apply, the Financial Breakthrough Bible did not really speak to anything in particular besides confirming Enos, or Enos. As in, King James Version says that Seth's son's name is spelled E-N-O-S, no H. And in some other versions of the Bible, it is E-N-O-S-H. That's the only thing I got out of the Financial Breakthrough Bible. Probably because it's only 2 verses and we're talking mainly about family and faith in these 2 verses. But I did also go on to my 7th read through Apply the Word, and the Apply the Word asks the question, what actions in your life brings goodness after pain? And so that's the question I'll be leaving with you. What actions in your life can bring goodness after pain? That's exactly what's happening here in these couple of verses. They've lost a son. They've gained a new one. Right now, I am 9 days away from delivering my 3rd child. And so the very first thing to me that came to mind was having a baby. Having a baby is not necessarily that pain-free for me. And so there's pain involved there, but there is an immense amount of goodness that comes after the baby is delivered. The next thing that's obviously at the top of my mind, since we're not going to talk about how many pounds I am up. being pregnant, but I am super excited about getting back to an exercise regimen after the baby is born. And so I thought about exercise. Exercise is something that can be painful during the actual activity. However, there's a lot of goodness that comes from exercise. And we know that there are so many health benefits. You feel good afterwards from the natural endorphins. And so I find a lot of goodness. And so we just look at apply the word Bible, because we want to make sure that we aren't just looking at the Bible as something that happened so many years ago and it's an example to us, and therefore we need to figure out how to apply it to our daily lives. And so I think that's a great question. I would love for you to think about that, comment about it. What actions in life can bring goodness after pain? So that was Genesis 4:25 through 26, a new son. This is the Spiritual Cinema series brought to you by Jasmine Field Speaks. I pray that you have a blessed day, and I will talk to you in our next podcast. Bye.